You're fired, old-timer. Your methods are outdated, and frankly, we need people who understand modern systems. The contracting officer at Whiteman Air Force Base delivered the termination notice to 75-year-old Thomas with bureaucratic efficiency. No warmth, no gratitude for 20 years of civilian service, just a form letter and 30 minutes to clear out his tool locker. Thomas had maintained the B-2 Spirit stealth bombers longer than most of the base personnel had been alive. He'd worked on the aircraft when they were brand new, when the technology was revolutionary, when each bomber represented the cutting edge of American aerospace engineering. But the Air Force had embraced digital diagnostics, computer-controlled maintenance protocols, and young technicians fresh from training with the latest certification. Thomas represented the analog past. He had to go. If you believe experience matters more than credentials, comment "respect" below. Thomas accepted the termination quietly. He didn't argue or protest. At 75, he understood that organizations moved forward, that younger people needed opportunities, that he was expensive compared to recent technical school graduates. He cleaned out his locker, said goodbye to a few colleagues who actually seemed regretful about his departure, and drove his old pickup truck off base for the last time. Nobody threw him a retirement party. Nobody gathered to thank him for 2 decades of keeping the world's most expensive aircraft operational. He simply became another statistic in the Air Force's continuing effort to modernize its contractor workforce. That evening, Thomas sat in his small house outside Warrensburg, Missouri, feeling unmoored. The B-2 had been his life's work. The aircraft's complexity, its revolutionary design, its critical national security mission, it had given him purpose. 3 days later, Thomas was repairing a neighbor's lawnmower when his phone rang. Unknown number. He answered to hear a frantic voice he recognized. Master Sergeant Richardson from the avionics bay. "Mr. Thomas, we have a situation. Bird 784 is down. Completely down. All avionics systems failed during a routine post-flight check. Diagnostic computers can't identify the problem. Contractors flew in from Northrop Grumman, and they're lost. Sir, we need you." Thomas was quiet for a moment. "Sergeant, I was terminated 3 days ago. I don't work there anymore." Richardson's voice was strained. "Sir, I know, and that was a mistake, a bad one. But right now, we have a B-2 Spirit that can't fly, mission-critical operations scheduled, and nobody can fix it. Would you be willing to come back?" Thomas considered. Part of him wanted to refuse out of wounded pride. They dismissed him as obsolete, and now they wanted him back when their modern systems failed. But the stronger part of him, the part that had dedicated 20 years to those aircraft, couldn't ignore a call for help. "I'll need base access authorization, and I'm not doing this for free." Richardson responded immediately. "Sir, whatever you need. The wing commander authorized me to bring you back however necessary. Name your terms." Thomas named a consulting rate triple his former wage. Richardson didn't hesitate. "Done. Can you be here in 30 minutes? Thomas looked at his greasy hands. Still working on the lawnmower. "Give me 45 minutes. He cleaned up, changed into work clothes, and drove back to the base he'd left just 3 days earlier. The scene in Hangar 6 was chaos. A B-2 Spirit, tail number 784, sat surrounded by diagnostic equipment, laptop computers, and frustrated technicians. The aircraft's smooth, dark surfaces reflected the harsh hangar lights, beautiful and deadly and completely non-functional. The Northrop Grumman contractors, 3 of them, young and certified on every digital system the B-2 possessed, stood around an open avionics panel looking defeated. Master Sergeant Richardson met Thomas at the hangar entrance. "Thank you for coming, sir. The situation is bad. All integrated avionics went dark 40 minutes into a post-flight diagnostic. No warning, no cascade failure indication, just instant shutdown. Every modern diagnostic we've run shows no errors. The contractors think it's a catastrophic computer failure, which means weeks of depot-level maintenance. Thomas walked to the aircraft slowly, his experienced eyes taking in everything. The contractors noticed him but didn't acknowledge his presence, too focused on their laptops and diagnostic tablets. Thomas approached the open avionics panel, looked inside briefly, then walked around the B-2's exterior. He paused at several access panels, studied some surface features, then returned to the main avionics bay. "Do you have a wiring diagram?" "Not the digital one, the original analog schematics from 1988. Richardson looked confused. "Sir, we have everything digitized now. Those old paper diagrams were archived years ago." Thomas shook his head. "Then we need to access the archives. This isn't a computer problem, it's a wiring problem, and the digital diagnostics can't see it." One of the Northrop contractors finally spoke up, his tone condescending. "Sir, with respect, we've checked all the wiring connections that interface with the avionics system. Everything shows continuity. The problem is in the flight management computers. They've suffered a synchronized failure, probably from a power surge. It's not something that can be fixed in hangar." Thomas looked at the young contractor. "Son, have you ever worked on a B-2 that's older than you are? Because this aircraft was built in 1993, 32 years old. Some of the components inside her predate your digital diagnostic tools. And there are legacy systems that the computers don't monitor because they're not supposed to need monitoring. If you think you can fix this bird with a laptop, you're going to be disappointed." The contractor bristled at being corrected by an old man who'd just been fired. "Sir, I have certifications from Northrop Grumman and the Air Force. I've worked on B-2 systems for 5 years. I think I know how to diagnose avionics failures." Thomas didn't rise to the bait. "I'm sure your certifications are impressive, but I helped install the avionics in this specific aircraft in 1993. I've maintained her for 20 years, and right now, she's trying to tell you what's wrong, but you're not listening because you're looking at computer screens instead of at the aircraft." He turned to Richardson. "The archives. I need those 1988 schematics. Paper copies, if possible." Richardson made some calls. 20 minutes later, a tech sergeant arrived with dusty binders containing original B-2 engineering diagrams. Thomas spread the schematics across a work table, studied them for several minutes, then nodded to himself. "There it is. Give me a flashlight, a multimeter, and access to the aft avionics compartment." The contractors exchanged skeptical glances but didn't interfere. Thomas disappeared into the aircraft's aft section, navigating the cramped spaces with practiced ease despite his age. The others waited. 5 minutes passed. 10. Then Thomas's voice echoed from inside the aircraft. "Sergeant Richardson, I need you to verify something from the cockpit. When you activate the number 2 flight management system, can you check if the master caution light flickers before it fails?" Richardson climbed into the cockpit, went through the procedure. "Yes, sir. It flickers twice, then goes solid. Then everything shuts down." Thomas emerged from the aft compartment, holding a small bundle of wiring. "This is your problem. This is the master ground bus from the analog backup system. It's a Cold War redundancy feature installed on early B-2s in case the digital systems were compromised by electromagnetic pulse. Most people don't even know it exists because the digital diagnostics don't interface with it. This ground wire has degraded over 30 years, and it finally failed completely 3 days ago. When it fails, it creates a ground loop that confuses every computer on the aircraft, making them think there's a cascade failure when really it's just one bad wire." He held up the damaged wire. "This is a $15 part, but if you don't know it exists, you could tear this aircraft apart looking for a computer problem that isn't there." The Northrop contractors stared at the wire, then at their diagnostic equipment, then at Thomas. The senior contractor, whose arrogance had evaporated, spoke quietly. "How did you know?" "Nothing we ran indicated a ground fault. The digital diagnostics showed perfect continuity on all monitored systems." Thomas smiled patiently. Because those systems don't monitor the analog backup ground bus. It's not in your digital documentation. It exists in the original paper schematics, and you have to know to look for it. This particular failure only happens on aircraft over 30 years old when the original wiring insulation starts to break down. I've seen it twice before, both times on early production B-2s. Fixed both of them the same way. Replaced the degraded wire with modern, heat-resistant wiring. Takes about 8 minutes. Thomas returned to the aft compartment with new wiring, his tools and confidence born from decades of experience. True to his word, 8 minutes later he emerged, closed the access panel, and gestured to the contractors. "Run your diagnostics now." They activated their systems. The B-2's avionics came online flawlessly. Every system green, full functionality restored. The hangar fell silent except for the soft hum of electronics. The aircraft that had been dead was now alive, fixed by an old man using paper diagrams and analog knowledge that modern training had forgotten. The contractors slowly packed up their equipment, thoroughly humbled. Richardson stared at Thomas with something like awe. "Sir, they flew 3 certified technicians from California. They've been here 8 hours. You fixed it in 8 minutes. Thomas shrugged. They didn't know what to look for. Not their fault. The training focuses on digital systems now, which makes sense for newer aircraft. But the B-2 fleet is aging. These birds have legacy components that the new generation of maintainers has never encountered. You're going to see more of these problems as the fleet gets older." He paused, then added with quiet emphasis, "Firing everyone with institutional knowledge of these legacy systems is probably not the wisest long-term strategy." Richardson winced at the implication. "Sir, I agree. And I think Command is realizing that now. Would you be willing to discuss returning? Not as a contract technician, as a consultant, senior technical advisor, someone who can help bridge the gap between the old systems and the new technicians." Thomas considered the offer. Part of him wanted to refuse, to make them regret the casual dismissal. But looking at the B-2, at the young technicians who genuinely wanted to learn, at the mission that mattered more than his pride, he knew what he would do. "I'll come back, but on conditions. 1. I work with your young technicians as a mentor, not in competition with them. 2. You establish a proper program for documenting and transferring legacy knowledge before it's gone completely. 3. You stop firing experienced personnel just because you think newer is better. And 4. My consulting rate remains triple what you were paying me before, because apparently that's what it takes to recognize value." Richardson grinned. "Sir, I'll take those conditions to the wing commander personally, but I'm pretty sure they'll all be approved." Within a week, Thomas was back at Whiteman Air Force Base, this time with a title, a proper office, and a mandate to teach. The young technicians who'd initially viewed him as an outdated relic now sought him out, constantly. He taught them about analog backup systems, about mechanical redundancies, about the engineering decisions made when the B-2 was designed in an era before modern computing. He showed them how to read paper schematics, how to diagnose problems by sound and smell and intuition when digital systems provided no answers. He emphasized understanding the aircraft as an integrated machine, not just a collection of computer systems. The contractors from Northrop Grumman requested him for consultation on other difficult maintenance issues across the B-2 fleet. Thomas developed a comprehensive documentation program, systematically recording legacy knowledge that existed only in the minds of aging technicians and engineers. He interviewed retired maintainers, compiled technical notes from decades of maintenance logs, and created supplementary training materials that filled gaps in modern curricula. The Air Force expanded his program Air Force-wide, applying the concept to other aging aircraft platforms where institutional knowledge was disappearing as experienced personnel retired or were forced out. Thomas became a recognized expert on legacy system maintenance, speaking at conferences, training instructor-level personnel, and consulting on problems that stumped younger technicians. At 77, he was busier and more valued than he'd been in decades. The contracting officer who'd fired him was quietly reassigned. Nobody discussed it openly, but everyone understood that his decision to terminate experienced personnel without understanding the consequences had been a career-damaging mistake. The young technicians who'd initially dismissed Thomas as outdated learned humility. They learned that new isn't always better, that paper sometimes beats computers, that decades of hands-on experience creates intuitive knowledge that no certification can replace. They learned to value what Thomas represented: the institutional memory of complex systems, the hard-won wisdom of thousands of maintenance actions, the deep understanding that comes only from time and dedication. Most importantly, they learned to listen to people who'd been there before them. Bird 784, the B-2 that Thomas had fixed in 8 minutes, flew its next mission on schedule. The pilots never knew how close they'd come to a prolonged maintenance grounding. They never knew that an old man with paper diagrams had saved their mission while young contractors with laptops had been helpless. Thomas preferred it that way. He didn't need credit or recognition. He needed to know the aircraft were flying, the mission was accomplished, and knowledge was being preserved for the next generation. When reporters later asked him about being fired and then brought back, he was gracious. The Air Force is evolving. Digital systems are the future, but the planes we have now were built with analog components, and we can't forget that. The young technicians are excellent. They just needed someone to teach them what the computers don't know. Thomas worked until he was 82, finally retiring when his health demanded it. By then, his documentation program had been institutionalized across the Air Force. His former students held senior positions in maintenance organizations throughout the service. The knowledge he'd preserved had prevented countless maintenance failures and saved millions of dollars in unnecessary repairs. At his retirement ceremony, a 3-star general presented him with the Air Force Civilian Award for Valor, the highest honor given to non-military personnel. The citation recognized his exceptional service, technical expertise, and invaluable contribution to Air Force readiness. Thomas accepted it humbly, joking that he'd only fixed what was broken. But everyone present understood the deeper truth. He'd fixed more than aircraft. He'd fixed a system that had been discarding wisdom in favor of credentials, experience in favor of modernity, institutional knowledge in favor of cost savings. The hangar where Thomas spent his final years still displays a plaque commemorating his service. It includes a photo of him working on Bird 784 surrounded by young technicians eager to learn. The inscription reads, "Knowledge has no expiration date, experience has no substitute, respect has no age limit." Every new technician assigned to the B-2 maintenance group learns Thomas's story. They hear about the firing, the emergency callback, the 8-minute fix that stumped modern diagnostics. They learn the lesson. Never assume that newer means better. Never dismiss experience as obsolete. Never underestimate someone who's been doing the job longer than you've been alive. Thomas's legacy isn't just in the systems he maintained or the knowledge he preserved. It's in the culture shift he inspired. A renewed respect for experience, a recognition that institutional memory matters, and an understanding that sometimes the old ways aren't outdated, they're foundational. If you believe that experience deserves respect, that institutional knowledge is irreplaceable, and that age brings wisdom rather than obsolescence, subscribe to this channel. We share stories that honor the expertise of those who've dedicated their lives to excellence, who've been dismissed and vindicated, who've taught us that the quietest voices sometimes carry the most important knowledge. Share Thomas's story with someone who's ever been told they're outdated or obsolete. Comment about times when experience proved more valuable than credentials, when analog beat digital, when the old ways solved problems the new ways couldn't. These stories preserve the understanding that progress doesn't mean abandoning wisdom, that evolution doesn't require forgetting foundations, and that the people we dismiss today might be exactly the people we desperately need tomorrow.